Judy Tuwaletstiwa's exhibition Incantation. I would like, as always, to thank our team. It takes a village, and we could not do it without them, so I want to really express my gratitude. Thank you. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome artist Judy Tuwaletstiwa and for conversation with William Gassaway, PhD, Assistant Curator of Art at the Albuquerque Museum. As a curatorial fellow at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, William Gassaway worked closely with one of the country's largest and most diverse collections, focusing primarily on works from pre-colonial Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru. He later served as associate educator in academic and professional programs at the Met, where he designed and hosted the museum's long-standing fellowship and international staff exchange programs for emerging and established curators, conservators, and educators. An accomplished art historian with a broad knowledge of Western and non-Western art, William Gassaway has taught undergraduate and graduate courses at Columbia University and presented his research at Princeton University, UCLA, and NYU's Institute for Fine Arts. He has curated several remarkable exhibitions at the Albuquerque Museum, including Abstracting Nature, an exhibition in which the work of Judy was included. And most recently, he co-curated The Woods Before Sunrise, Environment and Place in New Mexico's Black Contemporary. It is a great exhibition. If you have the opportunity, please go to see it at the Albuquerque Museum. It is on view until October 18. Just opened. Many in the audience, of course, know Judy Tuwaletstiwa. She is a multimedia artist, a writer, and a teacher, a celebrated artist with a long career of residencies, exhibitions, and collections to her name. She is a recipient of the New Mexico Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts. Her art lives in private, public, and museum collections. Special editions of her 3 books, including her 2016 book, Glass, published by Regis Books, reside in libraries such as the Corning Museum of Glass, Racco Library, and Yale's Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscript Library. For more information on Judy's career, I will refer you to our website. There is also a biography in the back on the table, and we also have in the back a few books of her latest book, Chapo series. It was published last year by the TI Collection. I will, as always, when we have a talk or a conversation, invite you to come back and look at the art in the light of what we discussed. It is really interesting. I also would like to draw your attention that on July 11, we will have an event here at the gallery, and so please come back and experience art, music, and poetry with Judy and musician Lauren Weiss. Before I turn the microphone to Judy and William, I would like to really draw your attention, as many of you know, all the works on the walls are glass. I really encourage you to pay attention to the marking on the floor and make sure you don't lie against the wall. And really, please help us keeping her artwork as beautiful as it is. We will open after the conversation, we will open the microphone to questions. So if you have a question for Judy or William, I'm going to leave the time for it. Thank you. want to, yeah?
Yes.
You can put it higher, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you, Lena.
Judy, is it?
Hi, William. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I've heard wonderful things about you.
Me too, just now. Yeah.
I'm not even sure this is William. I think it's some guy who wandered in off the street and needed a good chair.
Well, thank you all for being here. Delighted to be in conversation with you, Judy. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Really honored to be able to sit with you in this new series. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, how do we kick things off? Judy and I had lunch yesterday at her dining room table, and then eventually went into the studio after about 3.5 hours of not talking about today and what we were there for. We realized we're probably fine for tomorrow. So, no, but it was really wonderful to see this show 2 weeks ago, and then to be able to go into your studio yesterday. And I realize now what you meant, that it was hard to pick which works to include in this show because you were just producing at a phenomenal rate and with just a joyful, seemingly endless flow of ideas and creativity. Tell us how this series came about, and I'd be happy to just kind of bounce ideas off of each other just to get started. So if you wouldn't mind, this is called Incantations. Where does that title come from, and how did this series come to be?
So lines are incantations. I never quite know where the titles come from, except they felt like chants. They felt like prayers in a very ancient sense. And an incantation is a chant. And I felt like that's what was going on. My work is often tied into sound, though there isn't sound with it, but I think in those terms. Music, I grew up on Paul Robeson, on Pete Seeger, on Mexican music, on not really rock and roll, more black music, Jewish music. I was very lucky. Japanese sounds. I was very lucky. And that underlies, I go to Catholic Mass with my friend Margarita, and the sound, the cadence, it was golden. So when I use gold, that sound is in me, even if I'm not trying to make it that. This particular series came from an experience at Rodin Crater. Does everyone know what Rodin Crater is? James Turrell. It's a piece that James Turrell has been working on since 1976. He's 83 years old now, and he said he has about 6 more years to complete it. And it's between the Hopi Reservation and Flagstaff. And it's not open to the public. But we were lucky through a childhood friend of James's, to meet James. And he invited us after having lunch. I'm a pretty good cook, right?
Absolutely.
After having lunch with us here in Galisteo, he said, next time you're out at Hopi, let's come on up and we'll spend the day at the crater. What I said to James was that 25 years ago, Philip and I had been at the crater. And this is truly the great earthwork of our time, if not one of the greatest works of our time. We had been there. Friends at Hopi knew the manager, and she invited them to come. And they invited us to come. And we got there late in the afternoon, walked around the crater. We which was the center cone Pachina crater at one point, so very connected to Hopi. And then we sat inside, and we looked out through the oculus, and it was changing from day to night. And you know that blue, this blue, that appears for a few minutes, is so ephemeral? I was bathed in it for half an hour. That's what the oculus did. You got to look at it, breathe it, feel it. It's an astounding color. And that sat in my body for 25 years. And then when James took us around and showed us what's happened since back then, since 25 years ago, that came alive again. And when we got home, I mixed my powders and started this series and couldn't stop. At one point I told James on the phone that I was very annoyed with him. And he said, why? And I said, because you're 83 and I'm 85. And I got so inspired that I can't stop working. And this is very difficult at 85. But it's actually quite amazing to be this age and to be able not to stop working. And the work simply wants to be made and wants to be made and wants to be made. And this is such a universal color that started it, right? How many people here know this color? Yeah, all of us. We probably, if I ask each of you, what is your relationship to this color? I'll bet you have one. Right? Yeah.
So,
And William, I think what I can say is, you know, when I started doing art, I was healing very deep personal wounds, as well as racial wounds. I mean, many levels of woundedness. And I knew that if I didn't heal those, I could not do work that would be universal. I knew it from the beginning.
when we were talking yesterday, we got a little bit into that realm of psychology and also the unconscious. And I think we're going to have opportunities to unpack that a little bit more. But I think for those who are only learning about James Turrell and his work now, it's helpful to understand what he and the other light and space artists were doing back in Southern California in the 1960s. Think about what a dynamic place that was, where there's so much space travel being formed and formulated there and inspired there, and the tools and equipment and shuttles to be able to realize that ambition. It's all unfolding in these experimental corners and laboratories of Southern California at that time. And meanwhile, James Turrell obtained his bachelor's from Pomona College in psychology and began to experiment with this realm of optics and of creating spaces that intentionally challenge both physical and psychological perception of the world. And I had the opportunity to dive so much deeper into his work a year ago or so when we were putting on the exhibition at the Albuquerque Museum, Light, Space, in the Shape of Time, and worked with Elena here to borrow James Turrell work for that exhibition. And that exhibition was intentionally sparse. It was intentionally filled with space, if that's not an oxymoron. There were 25 works total, and the idea was to let each one breathe and to have the space around it so that you could understand and experience the dynamics that unfold with that thing on the wall. And the intent was as much to take in that work as the space that work creates around it. That wall is different because that work is on it, That work is different because it's on this particular wall and not another. And as you're there viewing it, the heat and the noise and the refraction of light caused by environmental factors, you walking behind me at the same time, we are continuously creating an experience that has never happened before and never will again. And so it's in this sort of context that he is working on this monumental, half-century long project inside of a volcanic cinder cone that allows you to cut out all the noise and to concentrate just on the experiential effects, the phenomenological effects of light and air, atmosphere, the bodies around you, and the continuous creation of new realities, really.
Yes.
Yeah. And reminding myself more about the Rodin crater ahead of this conversation, I found some page on the Getty website that apparently was old because it said Terrell intends to finish this project in 2002.
Well, I suspect he did. He did intend. Just like 6 years from now. No, it's not going to be done. He keeps adding new things, museums, other things. I think, listening to William now, we were talking yesterday about inspiration. And I believe that part of the work of an artist is to inspire others. All of us. And especially other artists. And as we were speaking yesterday, I said to William, you know who has inspired me again and again? Curators. The way that they look at an artist's work. A great curator. Like, I don't know how many of you saw the David Smith show back in 1980 at the National Gallery. That curation was perfection. And there's just so many, the curation of the Philadelphia Art Museum, Cy Twombly's 50 Days at Lillian, or at the Houston, at the Manel Foundation. And curators who can truly see as artists, whether curators like, one of my books ended up at the Beinecke, well, a couple of them did, at the Beinecke Rare Book Library, and I met Pat Willis, a curator of literature, American literature. And I'm just stunned by people who can see in such wide ways, like what William was just talking about. So that when you walk through something, even somebody behind you has an effect on what you're seeing and how you're perceiving it. So important. And I love working with Alina in C. Stand up, C. This is C. C is a therapist. He's putting in his hours. But he also, the way that he likes work. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a slight golden glow on the top of these. That's because there's gold leaf on top. And it's very important that this blue also, there you can actually see the gold in between. But here you only see the reflection of the gold. And you think about the medieval period where those colors are so powerful, so meaningful. And you lit this in a way so that the halo would be there.
Well, thank you for your kind words about curation and what that relationship has meant to you in so many different contexts. It is how we first met. It wasn't just yesterday at lunch. This was, 2 years ago, I suppose, when we were putting together this exhibition, Abstractly Nature. The catalog for this exhibition featured Judy's work, Mother Earth, Father Sky, on its cover. And it was facilitated by Alina through a private collector, Joan Light, Senate resident, who was so touched to be able to include Judy's work, and that we were so compelled to include it on the cover, that she ended up giving the work to the museum afterward, and shortly before she passed away. we're extremely grateful for that. It is not our first work by Judy in the collection, but it is our best work by Judy. And I'm just delighted to be able to highlight this. And this, exactly as I said, this is the reason we first started speaking, and immediately you invited me to your house. And again, we got into, went down some rabbit holes of travel, cultural competency, psychology, poetry. It's limitless whenever we have a conversation. But I appreciate that you invited me up immediately to your studio so that we could get to know each other in a more deep and meaningful way. And I remember in that first conversation, I was still getting up to speed on your work, because the idea to include your work had been our former head curator, Josie Lopez's idea. And then I took it from there to bring to fruition after she departed the museum. And talking with you in your studio, you said, let me show you this other glass work. You pointed to a canvas on the wall. And I'm looking all around the glass work and thinking, I think, Judy, you and I have a different idea of what glass is. And you said, oh, that's because I only fired it to 1250 degrees. If I fired it to 1330 degrees, it would look more like what you were expecting, perhaps. And so the basic elements are all there, with the soda ash and silica sand and limestone, heat, all these elemental materials. But can you tell people, please, what exactly is, what are they looking at here? How is it created? What is your technique and your process for bringing these works to reality?
Okay, so you can see some of the technique. Melinda's back there, and Melinda is a wonderful videographer. And there's some videos on my website that show sifting and making some of these. I'm also on Instagram because I have a grandson who another one of my grandchildren said, Grandma, can I do a YouTube channel for you? I said, sure. He's 12 years old. And 5 minutes later, he came back. He said, I put your TikToks on your YouTube channel. So I don't do any of this. But you can see me actually working with my grandson, Caleb, on the Instagram, at Tuwaletstiwa. So, in terms, I was artist in residence at Bullseye Glass Resource Center here in Santa Fe. Wonderful, wonderful place. What a generous company they are. And basically, Dan Schwer and a couple of other guys 50 years ago created the kiln glass movement. Most glass was blown and would be done other ways, but they started creating kilns and firing. They actually were recycling old glass and slowly developed into its own form. And I was lucky enough to have a residency for 1.5 years at Bullseye Resource Center. 3 days a week I would come in. I had the use of 4 huge kilns. And part of what happened was, in 1993, I did a series based on an experience with the Black Salvation Army Santa in New York City. And I did a series of paintings that I'd never shown. And some of them are 4 by 10 feet. And soon after that, Philip and I moved to the Hopi Reservation, to a house that his father had. And my palette reduced itself at Hopi to the colors of the Santa. He had deep black skin. He had a very new white cotton beard and a red suit. And basically, my colors reduced themselves for the next 20 years to that palette. Except the white became sand, which was more neutral at times. So other materials entered my work. And I knew that one day other colors would find their way back into my work. But there was nothing I could do about that. I had to wait. And
In fact, what would happen when you tried to experiment?
I would get sick to my stomach. I would actually get sick. Susan Rothenberg visited my studio, and Susan said, and you know, she's a great painter. She said, Judy, if you could work with color, I would introduce you to my people at the gallery in New York. I think that was Pace, or, yeah. So the next day, I thought, okay, let me see. And I started working with some color, and I became sick to my stomach. So it was very clear to me that that was not to happen. When I began working with glass, when Lonnie and Dan asked me to be an artist in residence, suddenly color began to return. Because what you can mix, I spent that year and a half mixing 1,600 colors and making color samples. 6 by 6 inch that I gave to Lonnie and Dan to do a mural with up in Portland at Bullseye. And the subtlety of what happens, because what I realized is with paint, and I use acrylics because I like how quickly they dry. I'd often do them over sand so that they weren't shiny, and of course add matte to them. But nothing reflects the way sand does. And sand holds geological time. It's almost, it was like finding a medium that held everything I had thought about. When I worked with black, red, and neutral, I used a lot of feathers. It's not just the beauty of the feather, it's that the feather developed from scales, reptilian scales. I mean, that is outrageous. To have something crawling across the earth become a winged creature flying through the skies. It's beyond imagination. So when I worked with feathers, it was thinking of geological time, thinking of evolution, so many layers, and the sand holds all of it for me. And I use the simplest technique in kiln firing. Simplest. First of all, Dan Schwer designed a kiln for me, and my bed, or the shelf in the kiln, is 24 inches by 48 inches, so I can make a sheet that big. Very tricky to pick up, because it's almost paper thin. So lots of times, like when you were being warned not to hit the glass, I'm the only one who's allowed to break my glass. But if you break it, we'll make something out of it, so not to worry. But, so I simply sift the powders that I mix onto my kiln shelf, or also use a little spoon that's about 100 years old that my friend Catherine gave me, and I pick the powders up and make the tiny shapes, the little shards. Nothing fancy about my techniques. I've never been interested in technique. We talked about that. When I wove tapestry. That's as simple as can be. And of course, you can create the lady and the unicorn out of it. And I just feel by staying as simple as I can with technique, the complexity comes from the materials, not from my trying to twist it into something.
The thing that always baffles me most when I imagine this transition that you described millions of years ago from scale to feather is that the feather makes no sense until you take flight. There's a moment there where the feather emerges and there's nothing to do with it. It doesn't serve any purpose.
So they think that it's possible that the feather started because you had cold-blooded animals who needed warmth. And that's one of the theories.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, exactly.
But then it became outrageous, like a peacock.
Exactly. But no, I think it's I wonder if it's a useful tool for thinking about how you began this process, because the reason you started the Bullseye Fellowship is specifically because you were ignorant about glass. You had, in a sense, right, they wanted people who had no previous experience making glass into fine art. They wanted people who had an unadulterated approach to the possibilities of what glass can be. And as a result, you do something with glass that no one else has ever done. I think that's what is so remarkable about it. So at what point did you realize what you were doing? Did you have a work like this, for example, in mind, and so you made thin sheets that could create that, or did you make thin sheets and then only figure out then how they could be applied?
Interesting question. I always picture what I'm going to do. So these 24-inch sheets are 23 3/4 inch. I made them, but I always put them on differently than I thought I was going to. I walk into my studio in the morning, I have a clear picture of what I'm going to do. But that gets me in the studio. And I have learned enough over the last 55 years to know that I'm kidding myself.
Do you, I think that you intentionally cultivate a sense of naivete in some areas, you know, like in this example about the glass, it was something you realized that you didn't have any preconceptions about, so you leaned into it and discovered and spent many, many hours and now years exploring that. Do you intentionally cultivate a sense of naivete in the sense that you remain unarmed when it comes to elements of your subconscious bubbling up and allowing it to unfold in a natural way instead of trying to make sense of it, to interpret it, to wrangle it and classify it immediately?
I only do that afterward. Like Helen Colton is here, and Helen is archiving. Helen's actually a curator also, and an artist, and an archivist, and she's archiving my work. And I'm seeing so much through that process with Helen, to look back at work and see where this color began. And over the years, it's like having learned to totally trust my intuition, the images that come up. I was talking with someone on the phone this morning, a wonderful woman from Minneapolis who's doing great work in that great city. And she was saying something, and I said, you know, have you thought of using a beehive as an image for that? And she held up a piece of paper, and she has the word beehive written in 10 different ways. And that is something that has happened to me over all these years of doing art. So that when I see an image, I'll speak it. Or I'll start working with it. What's hard with this work is when you lay down the colors, they change completely depending what they're near. That happens when you paint too, but not like with the glass. It has something to do with the way light bounces off of it. And when you glue it, it changes even more. So you think you're doing one thing, and I'm constantly moving things around because it works or it doesn't work. And I don't even know what it is. Someone once asked, how do you know when a piece is finished? Well, when I was younger, I didn't. And now, at one point I realized, oh, it starts breathing on its own. I'm no longer needed. It has its own life. And then it's done.
I think that's a wonderful concept that does it work or not work. That's exactly the concept that I used to try to impart to my students when I would teach the Masterpieces of Western Art course. And like I was telling you, I would tell them up front, I am a specialist in non-Western art. I study Aztec and Maya art, ancient Uru, and I tell my students I'm well versed in this material. I'm extremely familiar, well studied. I'm able to take you through this entire course no problem. But if you want someone who is a medievalist, Zach down the hall teaches this different section of the same course. You'll love him. If you love Impressionism, Jackie, 3 doors down, is there, and she's incredible. You won't have any better. What I think that I bring to this conversation is that I interrogate Western art with the same questions as I would non-Western art, much of which I don't have a text to corroborate. I don't know the interpretation by the Aztecs 100 years ago of that particular work, nor do I know the names or biographies of any of the artists whom I studied. And for me, that was liberating. It was a chance to talk about bigger concepts like legacy, death, love, honor, justice, why humans make art at all. And so coming with that approach to Masterpiece of Western Art, I would tell my students as well in the first day, this is not an art appreciation course. I am not giving you the cheat sheet so that you know which artists deserve more of your time in the gallery than another, and I'm not going to encourage you to go up and read the label and make sure that that is a name you recognize so that you are sure to get your money's worth at MoMA or Getty or wherever you happen to be. What is more important is, does it work? Does it hold true? Does it honor and retain its integrity within itself? Not in comparison to other works. Just like I'm not grading them against each other, I'm grading them on their continual improvement against their own work. Does an artwork work or not? Does its internal logic hold up? And I think this was an idea that you were getting at when we were talking yesterday about this notion of integrity, and that the artists whom you most admire are the artists that most faithfully and easily express a sense of integrity. Who are those artists for you, and what does that notion of integrity mean to you?
So this whole concept of integrity, when I was learning to weave tapestry in Edinburgh in 1972, Archie Brennan, who, rest his soul, was a great tapestry weaver, was teaching at the College of Art a night course. I had 3 little boys at that point, so I took a night class. And he gave a lecture at the Weavers Guild in Edinburgh once, and he talked about integrity in art. And I asked him afterward, I raised my hand and said, what do you mean by integrity in art? And I always worried whether my work had integrity. What he said was, when you're doing a tapestry, and as you're working on it, and you see that something isn't working right, you don't take it out. You change it by what you do next. And that was such an amazing lesson. When I had met Archie, he was doing like a 6 foot by 6 foot tapestry at the Dovecot Studios outside of Edinburgh. That's where it was, with an actual dovecot out in front. And I walked in. When we moved to Edinburgh, I had just really started doing my art. And I thought, oh, I'll find some nice old lady who can teach me how to weave. Instead, I found Archie Brennan. And he was doing a David Hockney painting as a tapestry of a figure pressed against, and I'm not a great Hockney, he's not someone who inspires me. But this was inspiring. It was a figure pressed against glass. And Archie was doing it in fiber. And I was simply blown away. And I said, I want to learn how to do this. And he said, well, I'm teaching a class at night. Why don't you sign up for it? And I did. I went down to the university, back to the college. And Maureen, who was his assistant, was sitting next to him. She said, the class is full. And Archie said, let her in, she'll stick with it. And I still weave tapestry. But everything I do is based on that. And what Archie said after he said that about you change it by what you do next, he said it's like life. You don't get to go back and change yesterday. You change it by what you do today. And that was, to me, the essence. And the artist who most inspired me, David Smith, Marcel Duchamp, Barnett Newman, Cy Twombly, Philip Guston. Because their work has such, I mean, you think about Guston, he was at the top of his game as an abstract expressionist. Suddenly he's painting these cartoon characters. Ed Broida was a wonderful collector. Did anyone here know Ed Broida? Had an amazing collection. And he got very, very rich in Los Angeles on real estate and was very rich by the time he was 40. And he had an uncle who collected Rembrandts and others. And he said, what should I do? I'm just gonna, more money is just gonna keep coming in. And his uncle said, well, why don't you start collecting art? And Ed didn't collect Rembrandts, he collected contemporary art. And when nobody else was buying Philip Guston's work, Ed was. And before he died, he gave all 27 paintings to MoMA in New York. And it was, you think of the integrity of an artist, where they stopped showing him. Stopped buying his work. But he did what he needed to do. So there's no style that I'm particularly interested in. It's the integrity. Duchamp, 20 years working on a piece when people thought he'd given up on art and was doing nothing but playing chess. And he gave it to the Philadelphia Art Museum and asked that it be installed after he died of cancer. He knew he was dying of cancer, and he asked it to be installed afterward. That's integrity, because it's pure, it's the pure Duchamp, that piece. It says everything about the way Duchamp saw the world. I hope, how many people have seen that, the Etagone? It's worth a trip to Philadelphia. Plus, that's a great, I mean, Cy Twombly's, I was telling William, his 50 days at Ilium, I did interviews of guards at different museums. I just became intrigued by what are these people who spend day after day after day with the work think about? What work do they most love? And I did interviews at the Phillips collection, where you have to be an artist to be a guard, at least back then. This was the 1990s. The National Gallery, where most of the guards were inner city and had served in the military. Had no background in art. The guards at the Phillips, many of them were artists. Philadelphia, it was a hodgepodge. But every single guard hated, absolutely hated guarding the side Twombly's. And I asked them why. Because we have to watch people every single second. I said, what? They'll pull out a pocket knife. They think the artist is making fun of them. They'll pull out a pencil. We have to watch continually. That's integrity by an artist. I mean, when Twombly writes Cassandra 3 times on an 8 by 8 foot canvas, or 8 by 10 foot canvas, and crosses out her name 3 times. You feel just the horror of that moment in time. But the guards had to watch people because they would react, because they thought that the artist was making fun of them. Incredible.
Well, our guards at the museum would be on pins and needles with this display here. Exactly as Alina said, with folks anywhere within 3 feet of a wall filled with works of glass that could chip off at any moment. Glass as fragile as a crib.
It's so funny. One time I was in a show, when I lived at that Hopi, I was in a show in Phoenix, and the curator really wanted to buy the piece, and it had feathers on it. And the director of the gallery said, "This is a curatorial nightmare." What would he say today?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit nerve-wracking getting your work even from Santa Fe down the road to Albuquerque, and when I found out that we didn't have to return it because we now own it, that was a huge
You know, I try to think ahead. I have to let the material do what it wants. And
So, all the more beautiful for that delicacy.
it's the delicacy that's so powerful. It's the ephemeral, that everything is ephemeral. I mean, we're all ephemeral, right? And yet now we're sitting here and so absolutely alive. And I think what's at the center of my work, besides the concept of the woven structure, is the absolute mystery of what it is to be alive. So I'm not trying to make work that's going to last forever. Perhaps it will. I don't know. Matters his hands.
For this exhibition that I just put up on Saturday last week, we had a mural that is covering 70 feet of that wall. And already I've been asked a dozen times in just the past week, "You're going to leave that up when the show's down, right? That's going to stay there." I said, "No, this is your opportunity to see it. It is fleeting and all the more beautiful because it is ephemeral. It will go away. It will no longer exist. So enjoy it now. And if we never covered it up, then we never have room for another mural to take its place." But I do think about sometimes the sort of stratigraphy of that wall. If we could cut through that wall and reveal, 30 years of murals all built up.
Oh, that'd make a wonderful book.
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you do that? I mean, not necessarily cut through the wall.
Right. Not in a recognizable way, but what if we just took a sander to it, an orbital handheld sander, and revealed portions of it, and revealed the mural that was 8 years ago, and 6 years ago over here, and 4 years ago over here. That can be really special.
I think you should work with that. It's really interesting. My continuing painting, what that came out of? The Kiva paintings.
Right.
And there are like 100 layers.
Exactly.
And the Peabody Museum, I did a series in 1985, 86, 87, in which I was teaching myself. I didn't study art at school. I was very lucky. I studied medieval English literature. God, what storytellers. And when I'm doing my work, they are alive in me. Chaucer, the Gawain poet. Heaven, absolute heaven in terms of storytelling. But I wanted to teach myself how to work gesturally. And I had heard about the Kiva paintings. I was living in Northern California, but I had spent a month by myself in the desert trying to put my life back together after a very long-term marriage. And during that trip, I heard about Kiva paintings. And that the ancient Hopi would paint a mural, do ceremonies in relationship to that mural in the Kiva, and eventually whitewash it. And in one Kiva, Harvard's Peabody found 100 layers of murals. Just stunning concept. And being a granddaughter of immigrants and knowing how many generations of my family have had to leave this country or that country or this country or that country, to imagine being in a room performing a ceremony where the hands of your ancestors are on that wall. And I had met my husband Philip at Chaco Canyon on that trip. We had camped in adjacent campsites. And he was back in Seattle and he asked me, you're an artist, I want to learn how to paint. Well, I suggested, because he lived in a little apartment, that he get a canvas, get black, white, red, yellow, blue. Don't look at color charts, just start mixing. And do a painting, take a photograph of it, and then whitewash it. He was a captain in NOAA, so he was very regimented. And I figured this would help him loosen up. And of course, he never did it. He had his own way of doing things. I got off the phone, I said, man, that's a brilliant idea. And I called John Annesley, who stretched canvas in Northern California for 50 years, beautiful canvases. And I said, John, would you stretch? Because I didn't know how to stretch canvas yet. Would you stretch a 6 by 4 foot canvas for me? Because I wanted something I could relate to, have a dialogue with. And I set up my camera, and I didn't whitewash between. I just let one become the next, become the next. It was like storytelling, really. I mean, that's the effect. When we think about the different artists, the integrity of the artist, and I think about James Joyce, I think about Geoffrey Chaucer, and the integrity of those writers. And the story just kept unfolding. There were figures in it. There were 100 paintings on each canvas. And I knew when I started the first one that I'd begin with white and I'd end with white. I knew that none of the paintings would exist except as memories. I recommend this exercise to everybody. It is amazing. And I thought I was teaching, hit him in the, do it again. I thought I was teaching myself how to paint. I was teaching myself how to let go so that I could do my art. It was amazing. And I did a white one in 1985, a black canvas in 1986. I didn't plan on doing that, but 1986 came and it was like, oh, I need to do another canvas like that. In 1987, I did a red one. And there I dealt with my Jewish rage. I got to see it, to help heal it. Really important. And I didn't show, I never showed those until the red one I showed it in 2019 at CCA. It was the first time I showed them.
You recently had a publication of your Chaco series. When was that created in relation to everything else?
1989. After my month-long desert trip, that was sort of a culmination. There's a wonderful book, the Tia Collection bought that whole series. You know, I wish
The book is on display in the back too, if you haven't had a chance to see it.
Alina has it, and I wish young artists could understand this. I wasn't showing, I pulled out a showing for 15 years. I did so much work during that time, and it went into storage. But I have entire series, like those 10 paintings. I was hard up enough for money that I would have sold one of them. They stayed together. And now it's being held by the Tia collection with a beautiful book that the collector said, I want to do a book that's its own artwork based on this. That was 35 years after I painted them.
That's what we call integrity.
That's
what we call integrity.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. It's just like, I've been so lucky to be an artist.
Yeah.
I just, and to know the different people that I know, to have met the different people I've met through my art. What a blessing. What a blessing. And at 85, it's more mystery to me than it was when I started at age 29.
I think, in some ways it's surprising to me that you wanted to be in conversation, but it's these more elemental forces and deeper sides of your psyche and personality that I see why we're so drawn toward this relationship, toward this friendship, and our continued conversations. And I think about the James Turrell work and being in northern Arizona at high altitude where there's no interruption of the skyline in one of the darkest parts of the country, and then to realize that the people of Hopi always had that. They are people with that built in as a perspective on the world, who have that clarity, that darkness that allows everything else to shine through, and an origin story that is an upward movement through the oculus in a way. I think it's a beautiful synchronicity. And I think about that longevity of thought and endurance of an idea among the Hopi, among the Navajo, among the Aztecs and the Maya, that there was one point long ago an 85-year-old woman who looked up and saw something strange happen in the sky and told her granddaughter, look for that, see if it does that again after I'm gone. And when that little girl turned 85, she saw it happen again. I'm going to call it Venus. I'm going to tell my granddaughter, keep an eye out for that, see if it happens again. And after a while, they developed a map of the cosmos and a system to time not only the rising and setting of the sun, but the appearance and disappearance of the morning star and the occurrence of lunar and solar eclipses. And suddenly they developed a sense of time that is more accurate than we have today with our sloppy leap year that never makes much sense. That sort of clarity, that mathematical precision long ago ceases to be surprising or amazing. It is just how it happens. And I think that's wonderful that it's that setting seen through someone else's oculus this time around, but nevertheless the same inspiration that is fueling what you're doing in this moment.
Do you see what I mean about the great curator? Because, imagine, that is so beautiful what you just said, so powerful, so visually powerful. You have to realize William spent 8 years running a program with 60 scholars every year from somewhere in the world coming to New York for the entire year. To pick this man's brain with these 60 scholars from all over the world. He was one of those scholars in the program. That's how he got involved with it. And then he became the director of it. It's what the world needs today. And William carries this in him. And then he describes something like this, and the world changes a little bit. It's wonderful. Thank you.
will turn over the microphone to the audience. If you have any question, we'll come to you with the microphone so that you can ask questions to either one.
I think I can just make Judy, it's lovely to be with you again. I'm a former student of Judy. Can you tell us a little more about how you do this? You know, I just looked and wondered, how did, that come about?
So the question was, for those in the back that didn't hear, if Judy could tell a little more about how she does it. The outlook on what's
Or is it a secret?
No, never. Art should never, you were telling me about somebody who had, an artist, I think I read about it too, that patented a color. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, someone once said, can I photograph your work? I said, of course. I mean, that's what it's about, is sharing all of this with each other. It's so simple what I do. Really, I have a little sifter, I mix my powders, I put them in the sifter, and I sift it onto my kiln shelf.
There's no foundation, there's no adhesive.
No, and then I let fire do its work.
It's sand and powder? It's sand and the colored powder?
It's powder. Bullseye Glass makes art materials for about 50,000 glass artists. They do sheets of glass, they make frits, and powder is the finest frit. It has 4 different powders. And I'm not interested in the other ones. I'm interested in the finest.
But where does the sand come in?
Oh, this sand is in it, silica is part of it. It's glass.
Yeah.
Is the pigment the same that would be used for oil paint, or it's an entirely different?
It's a different thing.
So, okay.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways that the colors come in. But it's basically silica. And silica is so interesting because it comes from rocks. Feldspar also comes from rocks, dissolving over millions of years. Feldspar makes clay. Silica makes glass.
And these strips are firm enough to pick up.
A little, you know what I've discovered lately? The thinner I make them, the easier they are to manipulate. I had originally thought, okay, make them thick enough that I can pick them up and they won't break. The thinness lets me kind of move them like this. It's really amazing. Right now, though, I'm working on a series where I purposely take out the sheets and I break them.
Another question?
Is this made in one sheet or is it many sheets?
It's many sheets.
Many sheets.
Each one is a sifting. And I was a paper maker at one point. I had a big vacuum table and I made paper. And again, it all relates back to the weaving, to text. You know, the word texture means to weave. That's where text comes from. It's so beautiful to think that text comes from the word to weave. And it makes complete sense if you look at text like this.
We have another question here.
Do you glue them, or are they stitched? How do you attach?
You know, I have stitched some glass, but this glass is glued, and it's a matte gel made by Golden. I had used a different glue, and I had a show at William Siegel, and a piece was bought by a 6x4 foot piece of all the little shards was bought by the retiring president of the Museum of Glass. jumped right off the canvas. So I went to Artisans and I talked to T-Bird who worked there. She said, oh no, you have to use this matte gel. And matte gel is often used to build things out by painters, right? Some of you are shaking your head, you know that. Because the glass is porous enough, it receives the matte gel, which also sticks to the canvas.
We have another question right here.
Judy, could you tell us a story of making a work where you thought you were doing one thing, but the work spoke to you and it became something else? Can you give us just a feeling for that?
It's probably been every piece I've ever worked on. That's my cousin Andy. We looked at each other one day and we said, you know, our ancestors came from the same shell. I think it's true. Well, the chocolate series. You know, because I teach, I had to teach myself, right? And if you're a good teacher, you're always learning. So the chocolate series, I thought, sometimes I rush a painting because it's so uncomfortable feeling when it's not resolved. So I set up these 10 and by then I knew how to stretch canvas. And I had a connection at the Redwood Lumber Yard in Healdsburg who would save me the extra redwood strips. And I cut those and built 10 canvases. And I started one the first day. Second, I numbered them 1 to 10. And I started each one until all 10 of them were underway. And when I would get stuck on a canvas, and these are very narrative, they really are a story. When I would get stuck, I would just leave that canvas alone because I had another canvas to work on. Yeah. And they actually open at daybreak, go through a 24-hour cycle, and open into daybreak again. And I hadn't planned that. There was no thought that would happen. Because I would hang number 10 or number 5 and paint them. Then I'd hang number 5 or number 9. And I kept moving them around. I had no idea what was going to happen. And that was very much. Thank you, Andy. Any other questions? You all listen so beautifully. So wonderful.
Judy, I had a question and wondered if you could talk a little bit about the edges. Because there's something about a number of these edges that have almost an atmospheric perspective to them, especially the ones that are behind you. But then some of the edges are facing up, or they're facing down. So I wondered if you could just talk about how in the making of the sifting, the edges matter to you. Do you just let them happen? Do you think about their perspective or any?
Sifting them is just, I just lift that rough edge, but in paper, what is it called?
Decal.
The decal, that's it. I just let the decal happen. And I suspect if I hadn't made paper that I wouldn't have used this way. Yeah, the decal just happens. And then it's magical when you put it with something else. It's like, whoa.
And the thing
Like
is,
on the one next to you, I painted gold, iridescent gold on the back of those. And they come through because the edge is deckled.
May I add something to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is a brief, I love this concept of noticing the perspectival, atmospheric perspective, and seeing that connection to perspectival sort of recession. This idea developed most notably by Leonardo when he would teach his students that a mountain that's far away is blue. A mountain that is 5 times far away is 5 times more blue. And that's how you convey distance. The essayist Rebecca Solnit touches on a very similar topic in a book that I gave Judy leading up to our conversation a few weeks ago. And she says at one point, for many years I've been moved by the blue at the far edge of what can be seen, the color of horizons, of remote mountain ranges, of anything far away. The color of the distance is the color of emotion, the color of solitude and of desire, the color of there seen from here, the color of where you are not, and the color of where you can never go. For the blue is not in the place those miles away at the horizon, but in the atmospheric distance between you and the mountains. Longing, says the poet Robert Hass, because desire is full of endless distances. Blue is the color of longing for the distances you never arrive in, for the blue world. One soft, humid, early spring morning, driving a windy road across Mount Tamalpais, a bend reveals a sudden vision of San Francisco in shades of blue, a city in a dream, and I was filled with tremendous yearning to live in that place of blue hills and blue buildings, though I do not live there. I had just left there after breakfast with brown coffee and yellow eggs and green traffic lights, filtering with no such desire. Besides, I was looking forward to going hiking on the mountain's west slope. That idea of blue being a sense of longing, it is there seen from here, the place that will always just elude your grasp, and I think that's an idea that comes up often is what magic when you can realize something that you set your mind to and your imagination to, but there's so much to be learned when your ambition exceeds your grasp and you're still not able to get exactly what you set out to do, but it's that spirit of adventure and exploration that is the purpose itself.
That's so beautifully said. I'm thinking, there was a wonderful poet that I worked with in the schools. California had amazing programs way back. And Lee recently passed on. And Lee said to me years ago, he said, you know, the experience goes so far beyond our vision. And that's what happens when I'm working. The experience goes so far beyond my vision. Like, this one just wanted to be like this. And then my curiosity is, what's it going to feel like when you stand back from it? You know, when I would go to Washington, D.C. and see Barnett Newman's 14 Stations of the Cross, I would spend an hour just backing up, coming close, looking at all of them. I mean, it was endless, endless, endless experience of a great artist doing some of his finest work. And what I hope for my work is that people will look at it from a distance, and they'll look up close. They'll even want to touch it. Sorry, Alina.
There's a book in the back, the Reader's book, that has a little tile. If you really can't help yourself, you go to the
I had a piece in the show, the theater collection belonged to the Bellagio, and I gave them a piece of glass that people could touch. And I put it next to it on a pedestal and said, touch. But being able to have a work that's beyond my vision, that's the constant. Right? That's what we work towards. Never being able to hold it. With this work, I think part of what also has been at the basis of it is that we need moments of peace right now. You know, we need peace. I grew up in a world in turmoil. I was born into the Second World War. And as many of you know, my parents were communists during the McCarthy period. You want a crazy household? We got a crazy household. But being able, and we're back in that cycle again. McCarthy is with us again. Through Roy Cohen, who was a mentor to Trump. And you know, it's here again. And I think the work is like how to feel that deep peace that we each carry inside of us and be able to put that into the world.
Thank you so very much, Judy.